Now today, Honda announced a big update for 2025 for one of their more unusual bikes, the X-ADV 750. You see, this isn't a particularly popular bike here in the UK, but it's actually a big seller out in the rest of Europe, and having reviewed the previous generation a couple of years back, I can absolutely see why. It basically combines the comfort and convenience of a scooter-style riding position, but with big bike power and torque, and also some of the adventure-y image of something like an Africa Twin. And look, I'd fully expect this new 2025 version to be a big seller as well, with some well thought out updates that bring it bang up to date. So here we go with the 14 key things that you need to know about it. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Cardo for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. If you want to make use of some of the new features like the connectivity on this bike, which we'll get onto in a bit, then you'll need a decent Bluetooth headset unit, and we recommend Cardo, who we believe in our experience are the best in the business. Now at the moment I'm using their new flagship product, the PackTalk Pro, and it basically carries over some of the best features of their PackTalk Edge, like the brilliant audio quality and their dynamic mesh networking, and combines it with a brilliant new safety feature in the form of crash detection. So it's now got a crash detection sensor built in, and it will use the connectivity of your phone when it's connected to call an emergency contact if it detects a crash, which I think is really quite neat. We absolutely love using Cardo products, and so I'd fully recommend checking out the link down in the description below to find out more. And you'll also find down there a discount code for some of their products specifically for our viewers. Now look, fundamentally you've got the same engine here, but with a couple of key tweaks. And so it's the same 750 parallel twin as you'll get in some of their bikes like the NC750X. And it's a great performer because it's super practical, really efficient on fuel, and also fairly long strokes, so it's got plenty of guts. Naturally, with that sort of engine, it's not particularly peaky in terms of top-end power. It makes 57 horsepower peak, but there is a healthy 69 Newton meters of peak torque, and it's made fairly low in the revs at 4,750 RPM. That means it really does chug along nicely, and also it's got a fairly nice sound to it as well with the 270-degree crank. And also this bike comes with their DCT or dual clutch transmission for twist and go riding. So again, that plays into the sort of practicality of this bike, and if you leave it in automatic, effectively you've got a bike that rides like a scooter. But it is worth adding if you want a bit more control for quicker rides, or if you're riding off-road, or even if you're doing those low-speed maneuvers, then you can put it into the manual mode where you choose your own gears using the buttons on the switch gear. In fact, that sort of riding is one of the first key updates for 2025, with a bit of a revision to the DCT system, and they say that it not only gives you smoother starts from a standstill, but also a bit more control on the throttle at lower speeds, so under 10 kilometers per hour. And to be fair, that is the sort of riding that I think most people find kind of challenging with DCT. It does take a little bit of getting used to. So especially on a bike like this that could be used for commuting, a little bit more control when you're picking your way through traffic at lower speeds is always going to be a good thing. On top of that, they've revised the catalyzer for this year for cleaner running. So that means it now meets the latest Euro 5B or 5 Plus emissions regulations. And you've also got an update here, which means that cruise control is now fitted as standard. And again, this is a big boost for anyone who's doing regular commutes where you want to just take a little bit of the fatigue out of the throttle hand. On top of that, I should point out as well, you can get 3-piece luggage for this bike, so it might not be your first choice for touring, but it can do a bit of that sort of thing. And again, with longer stints on the motorway, cruise control is always, in my opinion, a valuable tool for a little bit more comfort. It is a fully fledged system as well, so you can enable it with the right hand switch gear, and then over on the left you've got a resume button and also plus and minus buttons so you can nudge the speed up and down. From a chassis perspective, I reckon this one is pretty much the same as the previous gen. So you've got the same frame, you've got the spoke tubeless rims with the 17-inch at the front and the 15 at the rear. Suspension looks about the same as well, with a Showa 41mm upside down fork. There's the monoshock at the rear, and then 150mm-ish of travel front and rear to give it that slight off-road credibility. And then also a pair of radially mounted Nissin 4-pot calipers up front to take care of stopping duties. The only difference of note from the chassis specs that I can spot is the fact that it's gained a kilogram of curb weight, and having pretty much the same engine and chassis, I guess that's going to come from some of the extra features that have been added, which we'll get onto in a bit. Realistically, that's such a small amount that I doubt anybody would notice it riding the two bikes back to back, and also this bike does carry its weight really quite low, and so it is fairly easy to maneuver. Wrapped around the chassis though, well, you do have a new styling job, and while it does continue that theme of like an adventurized scooter, they've just sharpened up the lines a little bit to keep it looking fresh. One particular area of interest might be the lighting though, where they've actually combined the front indicators with the daytime running lights, and they say that's actually a world first for the entire motorcycle market. On the plus side, it does give you a really clean aesthetic at the front, and also from a practical perspective, I suppose it'll stop you snapping off an indicator and having to repair it if the bike does go over. And my only concern here would be if they're actually visible enough and distinguishable from the daytime running lights, but they do look well thought out and fairly out wide, and so it shouldn't be much of a problem. Also on the aesthetic front, you've got some new paint options, and this bike, if I remember correctly, has always been available in a sort of red and black finish as one of the options, which gave it a bit of that Africa twin look. This year though, for 2025, well, you've got 3 options of graphite black, pearl glare white, and matte deep mud grey. Now presumably they'd have kept the red if it was a really good seller, but I do think it would have been nice to have at least one more vibrant and colourful option. Now there is, to be fair, a special edition matte goldfinch yellow, which does kind of tick that box, but the problem with this one is it's only going to be available in Europe and won't actually be coming to the UK. Something a little bit less obvious about the bodywork and panels though that you might not quite spot from the pictures here is that they've started to try and use some sustainable materials, like one that's called DuraBio. Now they say this is a biomass plastic, and the idea here is to help Honda towards their environmental target of 100% sustainable material usage by 2050. So yeah, the DuraBio is used for the side skirt covers and the windscreen. And also the luggage box and the seat base have been made from recycled bumpers from Honda cars. Then you've also got recycled polypropylene for some of the covers and panels across the rest of the bike. And as a side benefit, they also claim that DuraBio means they avoid the CO2 emissions that are typically associated with the conventional painting process. Maybe that means these bikes aren't actually painted and the DuraBio just has its own color sort of baked in. And that could be one of the reasons that we don't have the red model anymore. Maybe it's only fairly subdued tones that are actually achievable with this manufacturing method. Now, I think one of the best things about the X-ADV in terms of that kind of practicality is the wind protection, because the top half is a bit adventure bikey with a big nice windscreen and also some handguards to keep the chill off your hands. But then also your lower body is down behind the scooter-esque bodywork, and so it really does make for a nice cozy little cocoon. One of the updates here though is that they've changed the windscreen adjustability. So previously you had to do it with both hands, and that realistically for most riders I think meant pulling over. And it also had 5 steps of adjustability, so they've tried to simplify it, and now you can do it just with your left hand, so you can keep the throttle steady with your right and just get the screen up and down on the go. And they've also reduced it to 3 steps just to make it easier to get on with. On top of that, the seat height remains the same at 820mm, but they have narrowed it a bit to make it easier to get your feet down. And of course, this bike is a little bit wide around the body with those floorboards down either side, so a little bit of extra help here just to get your feet planted. And it is 237 kilograms, is probably going to be appreciated, especially by shorter riders. Then, in terms of comfort, they've added a bit of extra foam, so 10% more, and they say that should give you a little bit more cushiness over distance for those longer rides. The other thing I really liked about this bike as well when I reviewed the previous generation, it's the same with this one as well, is you've got that big storage space under the seat, so 22 litres in fact, which they say is big enough to take a full face helmet. So if you are commuting, you can leave your lid in the bike and not have to carry it around, for example. And you've also got LED lighting in there to make it easy to see your stuff, as well as a USB-C port for charging your gadgets. There has been, though, a bit of an update for 2025 with the seat damper, so they say it's now easier to open and close. And there's also mention of, if that's not enough space, a little glove box up front. I can't quite make out if this was brought in with the previous gen, but they do say there is now more space, even though they don't give any more specifics. Speaking of the cockpit, though, there is a big improvement here. I think it's probably the key update, and that's that the previous gen's LCD display now makes way for a full color TFT. LCDs, I reckon, are starting to look a little bit dated now. And also, I think the TFT is going to be more readable in varying lighting conditions. So yeah, this is definitely a big tick for me. On top of that, you've got a few different screen layouts so you can get something to suit your taste. And it also enables connectivity features so you can control calls and media, like I say, if you've got a Bluetooth headset. And also, if you use the Honda RoadSync app, you can get turn-by-turn directions right there on the dash. Through the dash as well, you can also control control some of the rider aids and modes. And for this sort of bike, it's actually quite impressive as to how much customizability there is here. The standard modes of rain, standard and sport are all kind of obvious. They're going to change the power delivery, the engine braking, the traction control and ABS, and also the behavior of the DCT system. So in the sport mode, for example, it will hold on to the gears for a little bit longer to help you get the most out of the engine. Interestingly though, you've also got a gravel mode, which gives you a high power setting, but with low traction control. And that's to allow you to slide the bike, even though it's automatic. And there's even a custom mode, so you can roll your own settings, and you can actually choose from 3 levels of power, 3 levels of engine braking, 3 levels of traction control and off, as well as 5 levels of DCT behavior. The specific update here though for 2025 is with the traction control, which they say has been re-optimized for all the different 3 settings, so it now gives a smoother intervention, which should lead to a more pleasant ride. So look, some nice little improvements there for 2025 across the bike, and they've also done a decent job of keeping the price reasonable. So for this year, it's going to start at £11,249, and that's as opposed to the $11,199 of last year. Now 50 quid up seems reasonable enough to me, even for the TFT Dash upgrade alone. Although I should point out this is probably still at the top end of the spectrum for this sort of bike, with something like the Forza 750 being the road biased equivalent and starting more so around the 10.5 grand mark. Thing is though, it is a bit of an unusual bike, but for the right person, that combination of the adventure image with the scooter style riding position, well, if it does hit the mark, then they're probably going to be willing to pay the extra because there's pretty much nothing else like it on the market. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of these updates, so do let me know down in the comments below. And also, if you want to see my review of the previous generation ahead of getting hold of one of these new models for review, then I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Also, do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next time.